Last week, we shared our thoughts on episode 1 through 3. Today, we're sharing our thoughts on episode 4 through 7.
So obviously, episode 4 was incredibly difficult to watch. I know that you said you had to stop halfway through it, right?
Yeah, it took me almost a whole week to finish.
Yeah, it was an incredibly tough episode to watch.
I did appreciate how this abuse cycle mirrors the one he suffers from Martha, in the sense that both this abuser and Martha find him in times when his performance is suffering, and they provide benefits that make it so that when they abuse him, it's harder to walk away at risk of losing those benefits. That was an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and the episode shows the shame associated with the abuse, and it really explores the reason Donnie kept silent about Martha as well. I think the first part of the episode really sets up how Donnie does not necessarily feel like he belongs in the comedy scene. And I think it does that through a couple of different elements. First, when he first arrives at the festival and he goes into the pub and asks where the comedians perform, the bartender just points to like the cabinet with the microphone in it. And it really shows that it wasn't what he expected the festival to be. And then also afterwards, when he goes to the bar and meets some of the writers from one of his favorite television shows, and he compliments them, and they just kind of ignore him and kind of brush him off. And it really shows how he feels like alienated by the comedy scene and how he feels like it shows how he feels like he doesn't belong in the comedy scene necessarily.
Absolutely. I think becoming the subject of a groomer is very similar to becoming the subject of a stalker. And I think that the show's like entire narrative arc does a good job of driving that point home. And not just the full narrative arc, but also like the narrative arc of this particular episode does a good job of showing that because like you said, it starts with showing how he feels alienated in this space and how he feels like a complete outsider at times in the comedy space, which he does throughout the whole series, but this episode really drives home those things.
Yeah, it definitely shows the complexity of everything that was going on, both around him and in his mind at the time. So in this episode, we see Martha's harassment really start to escalate. She's banned from the bar, and I think the repeated scenes of her yelling at Donnie really increase the suspense, and they make the audience really feel the danger that Richard Gadd felt at the time from Martha.
I think Richard Gadd does a really good job of implicating himself while also explaining his reasoning for doing so. He definitely could have benefited from therapy, which is ironic given that that's what Terry is. And his behavior and choices in this episode lead to Terry breaking up with him. I really loved the scene where Terry asked him, "What's it going to take to gain confidence?"
I wrote down that line as well.
It was a very powerful moment.
In terms of cinematography, I think it was a good choice that as Terry's and Donnie's relationship started to fall apart, we see the lighting in the scenes that they are in together move darker and darker throughout the episode. So the episode starts off when they're together at the kitchen table, and it's a very warm, inviting light. And by the end, they're kind of surrounded by this darkness, which kind of mirrors the demise of their relationship.
I watched a clip recently of Richard Gadd like talking about this show and his motivations and stuff. just like a behind the scenes Netflix thing. And I was surprised to hear him say that he wanted the show to be funny, not like haha funny, but just like a dark humor. And it really struck me because at no point during this show did I really find myself laughing, except in the case of one thing, and that was when Martha would go out of her way to write sent from iPhone. I always found that really funny.
Well, yeah, and it changes with every message. Like sometimes certain letters are capitalized. There was one where I think it just said like IPHON, like didn't say the full sent from iPhone. It just said IPHON,
Yeah, and
which which shows that she's typing it out, right? The messages aren't necessarily getting sent from an iPhone. She's typing out sent from iPhone or
yeah, I think that's always been pretty clear to him that it's not an actual iPhone.
I think one, I mean, now that we're like that you brought up the like moments of humor in this episode when he's moving in with those two other people. And it's like this great apartment, and he says, "What's the catch?" And then the camera switches shots very quickly to like he's in the middle of this party with all this noise going on, and it's like, oh, that's a catch. That was kind of a funny moment, but I don't think
Yeah,
I
we
laughed.
we did laugh at that. That was
Yeah,
pretty funny.
yeah, it was a good like camera shot switch.
Yeah, abrupt camera changes.
Yeah.
Episode 6. I think this episode is full of really great quotes. Do you want to give a summary? You're good at that.
Okay. So the episode begins with Martha starts harassing Donnie's parents as well. They tried to get the police involved, but the police basically say that his parents would have to open up a brand new file on her since she's technically harassing his parents and not him. I mean, she is harassing him, obviously, but the police kind of present it that way. We also find out that Martha has been secretly recording many, if not all, of their conversations. And then it ends with her coming back into the pub and attacking him with a glass, which does some pretty significant damage to his head and face. What were some quotes that stood out to you?
Well, first of all, I thought that scene was really interesting. Knowing that or how do I word this? So last time we talked, you mentioned that when he gives the one man show, Martha is played by a stool. And I thought, in light of knowing that fact, this episode was really interesting because I wonder how he manages.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen the one man show, but even with a one man show, like you can physically move around the stage. So I think maybe you could represent the attack by like falling back or pushing away or some kind of physical movement to represent that. One moment that was really frustrating and infuriating in this episode is when the police ask Donnie to apologize to Martha after all he's been through, to then suggest that he's the one that needs to apologize is just awful.
Yes, that was rough. There were a lot of quotable moments in the comedy routine in this episode. Ones that stuck out to me when he says, "Of course you didn't see anything in it. Of course you didn't. You only saw me." That was such a dark moment. Another quote from the comedy set that jumped out at me. "You'll do just about anything in the world he asks of you because fame encompasses judgment, right? And I feared judgment my entire life. That's why I wanted fame. because when you're famous, people see you as that famous. They're not thinking all the other things that I'm scared they're thinking. I just loved how that whole routine revealed so much about his inner conflict.
And I don't know if I would even call it a routine at that point. I wrote it down as the episode ending with a monologue.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I should say monologue.
yeah, I think that it's really a monologue and it's a extremely well written and well placed monologue as well, because it has given him a chance to kind of speak about everything that's happened to him and, like you said, all the internal conflict that's been going on in his mind.
Yeah, and it's very stream of consciousness. It's not practiced or rehearsed at all. It's just like everything he's thinking in that moment. So yeah, routine is the wrong word. It's definitely a monologue.
We also see in this episode Martha at the pub. She comes in and she starts talking to somebody else who's there. And in that moment, we really see her almost like weaponizing his comedy and making him feel ashamed of it, um, by kind of encouraging the customer to make fun of him, by harassing him about his comedy. And I think it really shows how cruel of a character or of a person she is in that moment.
After they kick her out and she messages him a bunch of like really terrible stuff, but then she ends it all with P.S. I still love you, that never changes, or something to that effect.
Mhm.
That's another darkly humorous thing that happens in this episode. Did you happen to look up the thing that he says to Martha in the bar? Serial stalker, torments, barrister's deaf child? Because I was going to look that up and then I never did.
No, I did not.
Okay, I was just curious. We can cut that comment, but I was like genuinely curious about that. And because her reaction was so strong that it made me think that there's definitely something there, you know?
Well, during one of the earlier episodes, was that from one of the articles he found?
I have no idea.
Because remember in, I think it was episode 1 or 2, he like Googles Martha and he finds a bunch of articles about her being a
Yeah, but
stalker.
I don't remember the details, so I can't tell you.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. All right, in this episode, the video of Donnie's monologue goes viral. He starts to get different offers, for different comedy opportunities and articles. But then Martha somehow gets his phone number. I wasn't quite sure. Do you remember how she got it?
No, I don't think he knows either.
Okay.
He goes on a trip somewhere and then suddenly he comes back and he's like walking when he suddenly gets a call from a random number and he picks up and says hello and then he like has a moment of panic because he realizes she's on the other end and she's found his number.
Yeah, and she's threatening to tell his parents about the video of his monologue. And he quickly has to go back to Scotland to explain to his parents everything that the monologue is about and everything that's happened to him.
I think it's really interesting that his life picks up after his big reveal about his trauma. I think that's a really interesting phenomenon to explore through art because it gets at like the somewhat problematic notion that artists need to suffer for their art. I also loved the reveal of the title in this episode, like where it explained where Baby Reindeer came from.
Mhm.
I like that it implied he brings Martha comfort in the same way that she brings him comfort. Maybe not in the same way, but he also brings her comfort.
Well, and there was also the echo of, I don't know if it was, no, it wasn't the first scene, but the echo of when she first met him. She walked into his pub, very upset, crying. He offers her a drink on the house. And now a similar but completely, different scenario is happening where he walks into a bar and somebody offers him a drink on the house because they see that he's upset.
Yeah. I love that last scene and how it mirrors the opening. Like you said, you can really see him have that realization that it's the same situation. And you can see him also like understanding that it's just a kind gesture.
Right,
It doesn't have to mean anything beyond that. And that's okay. Like kindness should exist for its own sake.
right, exactly.
My favorite line in this episode was in response to somebody asking him how the comedy is going. He says, "Oh, I've given up. Nothing like getting everything you want in life to realize it's not for you."
Mhm. Another part of this episode that stood out to me are the parts where he's obsessively going through all the different text messages and voicemails that Martha sent him as kind of a way to make sense of them, as a way to log and categorize them, as a way to kind of try to understand her behavior, although he admits that he doesn't think he'll ever be able to understand why she did the things that she did. But I think it's an interesting kind of exploration of the artistic process where he probably did a lot of that work as he was writing both his one-man show, or maybe beforehand, and then while he was writing the Netflix show as well. And how those are both probably also ways to try to make sense of her behavior, or more so, I guess, a way to try to heal from everything that's happened to him.
Another really heartbreaking moment is when he pulls up complimentary voicemails right after leaving his abuser.
Yeah.
Like we see him scroll through the phone and click on the ones labeled complimentary. And so it's
Yeah.
interesting that Martha's voicemails are bringing him comfort. And then again, like given the reindeer story that we get, I think it's interesting that he brings her comfort in the same way that she brings him comfort in that moment.
I think the show does a really good job of exploring how they are both people who are suffering, right? And that doesn't justify Martha's behavior at all, but it does make a point of letting the audience know that she too is somebody who went through a lot of trauma and a lot of suffering.
I want to amend what I said at the beginning of our first conversation in part one of this series. Like at the time, I said that I think it's about the artist's need for public approval. I don't think that anymore. I actually think it's about the artist's desire for catharsis via connection and understanding. And I think that connection and understanding leads to catharsis and validation. I personally don't think it's ever irresponsible to talk about your experiences. I think mining your own experiences for art can be damaging to the writer's psyche at times. And I think you should be aware of your intentions while you're doing it. Like, don't seek out trauma in order to write about it. But if trauma has happened to you, by all means, use it in your art.
If you feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah. I actually just interviewed Dianelli Antigua, and a large part of her book discusses trauma. And she told me that she hopes it helps someone feel less alone. And I think that's what
Mhm.
all artists want at the end of the day, because in many ways, I think it helps them feel less alone too.
Right.
It can be very cathartic and validating to do that, especially if it helps someone feel less alone. I'm saying all that because I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying that people shouldn't watch this show
What was their reason why?
because it's traumatic
Oh,
and that people are just like traumatizing themselves by watching.
it obviously is a very, very hard show to watch, and it is very traumatic. And I do think you have to be careful about what you choose to watch or what you choose to read. And so I definitely understand that argument.
Do you not agree, though, that you should be allowed to talk about your own experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. If you, yeah, absolutely. I think that for so many artists, talking about their experiences is part of how they heal. And so, absolutely, you should absolutely, if you feel comfortable talking about your experiences or writing about your experiences, you should do so, as long as you feel psychologically comfortable with doing so. Like, I don't think that if writing something like you were saying, like if writing something is going to harm you mentally, then don't do it.
Yeah.
If watching something is going to harm you, if watching something is going to bring up traumatic memories for you, or if watching something is going to damage you emotionally or damage you mentally, then you shouldn't watch it, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I watched that clip of Richard Gadd like talking about the whole experience, and he did like tear up talking about it. But I think like ultimately he finished by saying that he hopes that it like reaches people who relate to the things that
Yeah,
happened. So I think that's what he wanted from this whole experience. It's just like
right.
making a connection.
Right.
Is there anything else you wanted to mention about this episode?
So, did you want to talk about how he transformed this from a one-man play to a television series?
I mean, I mentioned it before when I was talking about the stool and stuff, but I think that kind of covers it. Like, I don't think there's anything else we can say right now because we don't know how he did it. We've
Okay.
never seen. I mean, I would love to see the one man show and compare the two just to see how he went about adapting a one man show
Mhm.
into something like this. It seems to me that he did a great job because the show seems very well written, but I can't say that conclusively until I've seen both. But that does really interest me. Let's go see the play.
Okay.
Let's look for the play.
No,
Maybe it's on YouTube.
we could probably find it on somewhere.
Okay, yeah. Let's look for it and then react to it. Have you seen Fleabag?
I have.
We should cover that.
That is so weird that you said that because I rewatched like a couple episodes this weekend of Fleabag.
That's so funny. I
That's
brought
so
it up
weird.
because my accountability partner said that he watched Baby Reindeer and then Fleabag, and he was like, "You should talk about Fleabag next."
Oh my gosh, I was thinking the same thing, but then I was like, will Heba want to talk about Fleabag? I
I
don't know.
know.
And that show is pretty old too, so I was like, I don't know if this will really help her
That
talking
is
about
so
Fleabag, a show from like 8 years ago or whatever. But I think he was probably talking about it because her show was also a one-woman show that she
yeah.
then made into an Amazon show, not Netflix,
Okay.
Amazon. So yeah, she started off also as a one-woman show that transformed into a television show.
Okay. I had forgotten that. But yeah, no, I love that show. It's so good.
Yeah, no, that show is so great. Oh my gosh, the scene, I just watched it, so this is why I'm bringing this up. The scene where they're like in the auditorium of the woman's like lecture, and the woman lecturer goes, raise your hand if you would trade 5 years of your life for the perfect body, for the so-called perfect body. And her and her sister are like, whoa, hands raised. And everyone else is just looking at them. Oh my God, so good. I'm like, that would be me and Heba, arms raised, everyone just looking at us.
And that is where we will end this episode.